This program is provided by Universal Genesis.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, forget about battles fought with armies. We're tracking a quieter war, maybe more profound, fought with ideas over centuries.
Yeah, we're looking at what our sources are calling the Great Reversal of Knowledge.
Sounds dramatic. What exactly got reversed?
It's basically this huge power struggle over who gets to define truth in the West. We're talking about the relationship between theology and philosophy, God and reason, you could say.
Okay, so charting how that relationship completely flipped from the Middle Ages to, the 19th century?
Exactly. And we're going to use architecture as a metaphor to make sense of it. It helps visualize the structures of thought being built and torn down.
I like that. So where does the story start? What was the original building?
Well, you have to go back to the 13th century, to Thomas Aquinas. He really established the dominant structure.
Okay.
Think of it like a huge, elaborate temple of knowledge. Impressive.
And the hierarchy inside?
Oh, it was crystal clear. Theology, God's revealed truth, was the absolute sovereign, right at the top.
And philosophy?
Philosophy was its servant. The term was ancilla theologiae, the handmaiden of theology. Its job was basically to support and elaborate on what faith already established.
So reason worked for God, essentially. Science was even further down, I assume.
Barely even a consideration the same way. The point is, revealed truth set the limits.
Right. So the whole story we're tracing today is how that servant philosophy eventually ended up running the whole show, a kind of intellectual coup.
That's the mission, an intellectual coup. And we'll focus on three key figures, three architects, you could say. Descartes, Kant, and then Hegel.
But first, you mentioned this temple built by Aquinas. Was it stable?
Well, that's the crucial part. Our sources use this great phrase by the 17th century. Its foundation was quietly rotting.
Quietly rotting. I like that. What caused the rot?
There was really two big things hitting at once. You had the Reformation, which just shattered the unity of religious authority across Europe.
Okay, so the central pillar was shaky.
Exactly. And then you had the scientific revolution starting to churn out discoveries about the natural world. Using methods theology didn't quite know how to handle, think Copernicus, Galileo.
Asking very awkward questions.
Very awkward questions with convincing answers. This growing instability, this chaos, is the backdrop for our first architect, René Descartes.
Right, Descartes. Mid-17th century. France. A time of intense religious conflict, the 30 Years' War aftermath, general uncertainty, Galileo getting condemned.
Yeah, a really dangerous time to be an independent thinker. And this context is key. We often think of Descartes as this arch-rationalist, maybe even anti-religious.
I think, therefore I am guy, putting the self first.
But the sources suggest his initial motivation was actually defensive. He wasn't trying to demolish the old temple, even if it was rotting. He was trying to save reason and the emerging sciences from the chaos.
So building a shelter.
Exactly. The metaphor used is an air raid shelter, or a refuge. A safe zone for philosophy where it could operate without getting crushed by religious dogma or political violence.
Okay, that makes the Cogito, I think, therefore I am, seem different. Less about arrogance, more about desperation for certainty.
Precisely. He was searching for one single, absolutely undeniable point to start from, like an Archimedean point. In a world where everything else felt uncertain, the act of doubting itself proved his own existence as a thinking thing.
So the Cogito was the foundation for his shelter.
The rock-solid floor, yes. But, and this is crucial, he didn't build the whole shelter just out of reason. He still needed God.
How so?
To guarantee that the world his reason was perceiving wasn't just an illusion, that his senses weren't systematically deceiving him. He ultimately relied on the veracity of God, the idea that God is fundamentally honest and wouldn't trick us.
So God is the ultimate guarantor of reason in Descartes' system.
Kind of ironic, isn't it? The father of modern rationalism needs this theological backstop. And architecturally, to make peace between his new scientific refuge and the old temple, he proposed mind-body dualism.
The famous split, substance dualism.
Yeah, a brilliant structural compromise, really. It basically said, science, you take the body. The physical, mechanical, observable world, that's your domain.
And religion.
Religion gets the mind, the soul, immaterial, untouchable by science. It created separate jurisdictions, allowing the scientific refuge to operate without directly threatening the core claims of theology. A truce.
Okay, so Descartes builds this protected refuge for science, cleverly using God's honesty as a guarantor and dualism as a dividing wall. But then we jump forward to the 18th century, to Kant. What changed? Did the truce fail?
Well, you could say Descartes' strategy worked too well. By Kant's time, the Enlightenment had happened. Reason, operating from that safe refuge, had become incredibly powerful, confident, maybe even arrogant.
So the threat flipped. Now, it wasn't religion threatening science, but science and reason threatening to just explain away religion entirely.
Exactly. The refuge had become a fortress, and its cannons were pointed back at the old temple. Rationalism seemed poised to potentially dismantle faith, morality, freedom, everything that couldn't be proven empirically or logically.
So Kant. Kant steps in not to champion reason further, but to limit it, to protect faith. That seems counterintuitive for an Enlightenment figure.
It really turns the usual reading of Kant on its head. His huge work, The Critique of Pure Reason, wasn't just an analysis of how reason works, it was an act of containment, an enclosure project designed to fence reason in.
Fencing reason in. How on earth do you do that?
He argued that reason has built-in limits. It's not this all-powerful tool that can grasp ultimate reality. And to build this fence, he cleverly used materials from thinkers often seen as his opponents, the British empiricists.
You mean Locke and Hume? He used their ideas.
He did. Not just to critique them, but he repurposed their insights. Locke's idea that the mind starts as a blank slate, tabula rasa, and especially Hume's devastating skepticism about knowing things like causality for certain.
Yeah.
Kant used these ideas to argue that human cognition isn't godlike. It doesn't start with innate truths about the world. It starts as this imperfect apparatus that has to structure experience itself.
So he designed the mind to be limited from the start.
In a philosophical sense, yes. He argued knowledge isn't just passive reception. Our minds actively shape it. But they can only shape appearances, what he called phenomena.
How? What are the limits, architecturally speaking?
He built very specific walls. First, all incoming data must pass through the forms of sensibility, space and time. We can't experience anything outside of space and time.
Okay, like mandatory filters.
Right. And then, to make sense of that filtered data, the mind must use a fixed set of concepts, the 12 categories of the understanding, things like causality, substance, unity. We impose these categories on experience to understand it.
So we build our understanding of the world using these tools, but we can never know if the world itself, independent of our minds, is really like that.
Precisely. That's the wall. Reason is perfectly capable of understanding the natural world, the world of phenomena, because it's built according to these rules. But it's structurally forbidden, constitutionally unable to know things in themselves, the noumena, ultimate reality.
And that's where faith lives.
Yes. That unknowable realm of the noumena is where Kant strategically placed God, freedom, immortality. Reason can't touch them, can't disprove them. He created, metaphorically, a palace annex or a safe country house adjacent to the main mansion of reason. Faith could reside there peacefully, protected by the limits of reason itself.
Wow. So Kant used reason to build a wall to save God from reason, a defensive architect for faith.
A brilliant, if complex, strategy. But as you said, walls invite climbers.
Which brings us to the final act. The German idealists who came after Kant, they weren't content with that locked annex, were they?
Not at all. They looked at Kant's forbidden noumena, that mysterious space he cordoned off, and they saw opportunity. The sources describe it quite vividly.
What happened?
First, you get Fichte. He essentially pried open the gate of the annex.
Okay. And what did he find inside?
Not Kant's unknowable God, but the self, the absolute ich, or I. He argued the ultimate reality wasn't hidden away, but was the creative activity of the ego itself.
So he put the self on the throne inside the annex.
Then came Schelling. He looked into that same space and saw something different. The divine reflected in nature, not a transcendent God, but a kind of immanent divinity woven into the fabric of the world itself.
So they were both trying to fill that unknowable space Kant created, but with things reason could potentially grasp, self or nature.
Exactly. They refused to accept Kant's strict separation. And then comes the final architect, the one who completes the coup, Hegel.
Hegel, what was his move?
Hegel looked at the whole structure, Descartes' refuge, Kant's mansion with its separate annex, and basically said, why the separation? This is inefficient.
He wanted integration.
Total integration. For Hegel, reason wasn't just capable of understanding the phenomenal world, it was capable of understanding everything, including the supposed mysteries Kant tried to protect. Descartes' shelter had become Kant's mansion, but for Hegel, it was time to build a single, unified royal palace of reason.
A royal palace. So no need for a separate annex for faith or art or morality.
None whatsoever. Hegel didn't leave them outside. He brought theology, morality, art, history, all of it inside the palace.
Inside. But how? As equals?
Oh no, as subjects. as necessary stages or moments within the grand unfolding logic of absolute spirit, which is ultimately understood through philosophy.
Wait, so he took God, the ultimate concept Kant tried to shield, and made it like a chapter in his own philosophical system.
Essentially, yes. The mysteries Kant protected were, for Hegel, simply aspects of reality that reason could, and indeed must, comprehend and integrate into its total understanding. The journey of spirit through history culminates in philosophy understanding itself and the whole process.
That's the ultimate reversal.
It's the completion of the coup. The hierarchy is perfectly inverted from Aquinas. Now philosophy sits on the throne. Theology, art, religion, they're all valuable, but ultimately understood and placed within the structure defined by philosophical reason. The servant has become the master.
Wow. Okay, let's recap that architectural journey. We start with Aquinas' grand temple, theology supreme, but its foundation starts rotting.
Right. Then Descartes builds a defensive refuge for reason and science, using God's veracity and dualism as structural supports.
Then Kant, seeing reason become too powerful, builds an enclosure and a protected annex specifically to save room for faith, walling off the noumena.
And finally, Hegel tears down the annex walls, absorbs everything into one vast royal palace where philosophy reigns supreme over all other domains of knowledge.
That really reframes the whole history. It makes debates like empiricism versus rationalism seem less like, just geographical preferences.
Exactly. Our sources argue it wasn't just Britain versus the continent. These were battlegrounds in this larger war over the status of reason versus faith. How much territory does reason get? Where do you draw the line? Descartes drew it to save science. Kant drew it to save faith.
It really was about building the structure of modern thought, defining the limits, negotiating the power between God and reason.
That was the central drama, yes.
So this brings us to a final thought for you, the listener. If this entire historical arc, from the medieval world to the modern, was shaped by this project of building rational architectures and defining their limits relative to older domains like faith,
Then the question becomes, what contemporary intellectual or maybe technological architecture is being built right now? Think about AI, genetic engineering, global information networks.
and what older domains, maybe ethical norms, spiritual beliefs, political structures, the very idea of humanity, is this new architecture trying to enclose, redefine, or maybe even absorb, just like Hegel absorbed theology into his palace?
Where are the limits being drawn today? And perhaps most importantly, who gets to be the architect? Something to think about.
This program is provided by Universal Genesis.